The Shrek 5 Backlash isn't about nostalgia, and I think almost everyone arguing about it online is missing what's actually going on. I went through the comments on my own last video about this trailer, hundreds of them, and something interesting happened. People weren't actually agreeing with each other about what was wrong. Everyone was upset, but for completely different reasons. And once you start sorting through those reasons, you realize the popular explanation that this is just nostalgia and people hating change doesn't actually hold up. So let's actually figure out what's going on, using the real reactions people left rather than guessing. The nostalgia explanation is the easiest one to reach for, and it's also the first one that falls apart under any real pressure. Someone in my comments made this point better than I could have. Toy Story changed its animation style significantly across 4 films as the technology improved. The Incredibles waited 14 years between films and came back with a noticeably different visual texture. Neither of those got anything close to this reaction. If audiences simply rejected change on principle, every legacy franchise that updates its visuals would get torn apart the same way. And that's just not what happens. So if it's not change itself, something more specific is going on. There's actually a useful comparison hiding in your own search history. If you think about other character redesigns that did work, Sonic eventually got fixed and audiences came around completely. The new How to Train Your Dragon live-action adaptation updated its visual language significantly and mostly avoided this kind of backlash. Both of those examples involved real visual change, sometimes dramatic change, without triggering the specific kind of rejection Shrek 5 is getting, which tells you the variable that matters isn't how much something changed, it's what specifically changed and whether that specific thing touches something people consider load-bearing to the character's identity. Here's the next theory people keep reaching for. It's AI generated, it looks soulless, and it looks like slop. I want to take this one a bit more seriously, because so many people used almost the exact same language independently, which usually means they're pointing at something real, even if the words aren't quite right. One comment actually broke this down well. The claim isn't literally that AI tools made the trailer. DreamWorks animators made this by hand using modern production tools, the same way they've made every film in the franchise. What people mean when they say it looks AI generated is that it has the surface markers of something built to be inoffensive and broadly appealing, without any specific point of view driving the choices, smooth, symmetrical, optimized to not upset anyone, which ironically is exactly the kind of output an AI model trained to please everyone would produce. So the phrase is doing emotional work even when it's not technically accurate. It's shorthand for something missing, not a literal claim about the production process. That's closer to the real thing, but it's still not the whole story either. There's an actual term for part of what's happening here that almost nobody in the comments used, even though they were describing it perfectly. The uncanny valley isn't just a horror movie concept about robots that look almost human. It applies to any familiar thing that gets close enough to the original to invite direct comparison, but not close enough to satisfy it. A completely different art style, something stylized and clearly distinct, doesn't trigger this response because your brain isn't trying to map it onto the original. It registers as its own thing. But a redesign that's trying to stay recognizable while shifting key proportions sits in a much more uncomfortable zone. Your brain keeps trying to match it to the memory and keeps failing in small specific ways. And that mismatch produces exactly the kind of unease people are describing as AI generated or soulless, even though neither word is technically what's happening. Now here's where it actually gets specific, and where I think the real explanation is hiding. Someone in my comments said something that I keep coming back to. They weren't bothered by the lighting or the textures or the resolution. Their actual issue was that the proportions of the characters' faces changed enough that it felt like a reboot, where someone recast the actor playing the role. Nostalgia says I miss how this used to look. This is saying something closer to, I'm not sure this is still the same character. And once you frame it that way, you start understanding why the reaction has been this specific and this intense. People aren't mourning an old art style. They're questioning whether the identity underneath the design survived the redesign. This actually happens with real recast situations too. When a long-running show recasts a beloved character, the audience reaction rarely tracks with how good the new actor's performance objectively is. It tracks with how much the audience can feel. The specific person they'd attached themselves to is now gone, replaced by someone competent, but different, underneath the same name and costume. The complaint about Shrek 5's faces is functioning exactly the same way psychologically, even though no actual recasting happened. The visual shift is producing the same kind of loss the brain associates with a recast, which is a much deeper unease than simple stylistic disagreement. And then there's the joke, the one that actually pushed someone in my comments from willing to give the trailer a chance to fully checked out. A twerking joke. Trailers exist to showcase what a studio believes is the best representation of the full film. If that's the joke chosen to sell it, that's not a throwaway moment. That's an indication of who this film is actually being made for, and what kind of humor the people behind it think will land, whether or not that read is completely fair to the finished film, which we obviously haven't seen yet. There's also a marketing decision buried in this worth pointing out separately, because it's not something anyone in the comments mentioned directly, but it's clearly part of the picture. Studios choose what goes in a first trailer very deliberately, and the choice to lead with a contemporary slang joke, rather than anything that demonstrates emotional continuity with the original films, tells you something about what the marketing team believed would generate the most immediate attention online. It's a short-term engagement play. Jokes built from current slang travel fast and get clipped into short-form video easily. The problem is that strategy optimizes for a completely different audience than the one that spent 24 years attached to these specific characters, and you can't actually serve both audiences with the same 30-second clip. Something had to be sacrificed to make that joke land, and what got sacrificed looks a lot like the thing the original fans showed up to see confirmed. So here's what I think is actually happening. It's not that people hate updated animation. It's not literally that anyone thinks AI made this. It's that two things happened at once. The faces shifted just enough to break the sense of continuous identity, the same character existing across time rather than a new one wearing the old design, and the one joke chosen to represent the film's humor signaled a target audience and sensibility that felt disconnected from what made these characters mean something in the first place. Put those two things together, and you get exactly the reaction we're seeing. Not nostalgia, not simple resistance to change. A specific, articulable sense that the identity underneath the character might have shifted, paired with evidence in the marketing that seemed to confirm it. That's a much more useful thing to understand than nostalgia, because nostalgia is something you can't really fix. You can't make a film as new as your own childhood memory of the original. But identity continuity and tonal alignment are things a studio can actually get, right or wrong, on purpose, which means this backlash isn't really a referendum on whether change is allowed. It's specific, actionable feedback about exactly where the new film drifted from what it's supposed to be a continuation of. Studios don't always get this right when they receive feedback like this. Sometimes they hear it and adjust, the way Paramount did with Sonic. Sometimes they hear the volume of the reaction without hearing the actual content of it, and they make small cosmetic tweaks that miss the real issue entirely, fixing lighting when the problem was always proportions, smoothing the wrong details while the thing people were actually reacting to stays untouched. Given everything in this trailer's marketing seems engineered for short-term attention rather than long-term trust, I'd guess the second outcome is more likely than the first. But the audience did its job here. They found the actual issue, articulated it more precisely than most professional commentary managed to, and did it within days of the trailer going live. Whether that diagnosis gets used by anyone with the power to act on it is no longer really up to the people who wrote it. It's up to whether DreamWorks is willing to read past the headline reaction and actually listen to what's underneath it. What's interesting is that the successful redesigns mentioned earlier, the new Sonic and the live-action How to Train Your Dragon, share something specific that this trailer doesn't. Both of those productions made the new design feel like a faithful translation of the same internal logic into a new medium or technology, rather than a cosmetic update layered on top of the same model. The new Sonic still moved like Sonic, still had the same proportions, doing the same expressive work. The fix wasn't a different character, it was the same character finally rendered correctly. That's the bar a redesign actually needs to clear, and it's a much higher bar than simply updating textures or lighting. It requires understanding why the original proportions worked emotionally in the first place, not just what they looked like on a model sheet. Whether DreamWorks understood that going into this redesign is something we'll only really know once the full film exists, but the trailer alone doesn't give much confidence that this distinction was on anyone's mind during production.